Thanks, bud.
Always love a hairdo. You can just take a washcloth too. Anyway, we're starting now. We are live. So welcome to Credible Live, and today we have a great show. This is a really important topic to me, and we'd like to welcome Joe Casey and Scott Lynch. So Joe is with Triad Data and Scott's with Hashdash, but I'm going to ask each of them to give you a sort of introduction of themselves because I'll butcher their bio. So Joe, why don't we start with you? We were talking off screen about your great hairdo. I'm heading that direction. So you have to get me the name of your
bangs look good.
Yeah, they do. You have to get me the name of your stylist. I love it. So
I will.
Joe, tell us about yourself.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brian. My name is Joe Casey. I am a co-founder of Triad Data Labs. I am born and raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I moved out to California about 11 years ago. I've been, kind of involved in cannabis commercially for probably about 25 years now. And I've had a very, very serious, passion for the plant for probably almost 28 years now. And when we got out to California, I started a collective with a friend of mine, a small vertically integrated collective. And we're in San Diego. And through that collective, I met my business partner, Dr. John Abrams, who was a patient of the collective. So through that, we've kind of been working on this concept for probably close to 8 or 9 years now. And we're close to launch, and we're really looking forward to bringing what we have to the market.
That's like the longest startup ever. I love it. So
yeah, it's the concept's taken a long time to productize, and we've gotten there, with your help, Brian. So we're thankful for you.
We're going to talk about that because that time that you've taken has been so important because it's all about the data. It's all about the science. And you've been doing some great collection over the years. I love when somebody says, I've been involved in cannabis commercially for 25 years. So Joe, when was it legalized? No, we're not going to.
Yeah. I've had 15 pounds in a hockey goalie bag before, back on the East Coast. And, I've also, with the collective, that was kind of the gray market. And then I've also helped some companies in LA with licensing. So I understand, and have been involved in the challenges of the white market.
That's great. So you're educated and a good OG from the industry, and most importantly, you're focused on the commercialization and professionalism of the future. So, Scott, tell us about yourself. We're really grateful that you're on the show today.
Yeah, likewise. Appreciate you having me on the show and the chance to be on the platform. So my name is Scott Lynch, co-founder and CEO of Hashdash. I have been in the legal cannabis industry for just over a decade. I started out really spending time on the R&D cultivation side. So previous company, we had a 10,000 square foot cultivation facility in Denver, Colorado. We were doing hundreds of thousands of tissue cultures on cannabis to understand at a biological level what cannabis needed from an NPK ratio. And so I spent a better portion of that decade going around to hundreds and hundreds of cultivation facilities, Organigram up in Canada to Humboldt County with outdoor growers that have been growing longer than I've been alive. And I really spent a significant portion of my time on the R&D side, jumping into the science, understanding the plant, and then understanding how that impacted consumers upstream around product quality and consumer outcomes. Additionally, since 2018, I have also been a pretty big voice in the health and wellness space. I have a top 100 mental health podcast with over 6 million downloads. So really bridging cannabis and personal growth and purpose-driven living. And a little more details on Hashdash. We've created, after many years, Joe, maybe not as long as you guys have been working on it, but 2.5 years, the world's first personalized cannabis matching platform. We leverage a proprietary algorithm that's powered by real user experiences and social listening to provide trusted and personalized recommendations, really helping customers confidently find the right strains, products, and dispensaries without all the noise that's in this industry and on the internet, quite frankly.
That's awesome. And 6 million downloads. I think I have podcast envy. That's great.
You will get there. It is such a long process. It's been since October 2018. So it doesn't happen overnight, as we all know.
Well, we're certainly getting there. Our live audience is growing tremendously, and I think it's because of the quality of the guests and the topics that we have. I'd like to take credit for it, but we're talking about important things, and really about the legitimization and the science and the importance behind this industry that a lot of people throw out because of the stigma. And this episode's really an important one because we're exploring how cannabis is really being personalized scientifically, technologically, and experimentally, right? So from a DNA based formulation to curated retail experiences, which we're going to talk about that. So how does this stuff sort of work with the DNA? How is it personal? And I think that's really where I'd like to start the conversation by, you hear people say that cannabis is personal, right? And in fact, I think it's our friend Len May has one of the podcasts that's about that, about, cannabis is personal. And he talks a lot about that and the interaction of DNA. But I want to hear from you guys about what does that mean? What does personalization mean in cannabis?
I'll start, and I think it's just understanding the concept that everybody has their own individual endocannabinoid system, and it's that if I may enjoy something, I may smoke a joint and enjoy it, and Scott may smoke the same thing, and it could give him crippling anxiety or some sort of side effect that is not desired, not what we're looking for. So I think that's one of the foundations of kind of the concept of personalizing cannabis is that, and everyone is looking for something different and everyone's body reacts differently to, cannabinoids and, all the other good things that are in the plant, terpenes and esters and thiols and all these things that, the research is just getting into.
That's interesting. So it's not a one size fits all. What say you about it, Scott?
To add on to that, I think that it's first and foremost on the consumer side, it's understanding not only everything Joe said, but also your own body, right? I think something that's been very evident in this industry and has become more rampant over the years is there's significant trial and error. And if we get down to brass tacks, that's kind of a lot of things in life, right? We try something that works, we double down, it doesn't, we pivot. But I think first and foremost for a consumer, it's understanding what works for you specifically, being able to have a platform or environment to record the things that work and the things that don't, and then being able to walk into a dispensary and have an interaction beyond a transactional bank-like interaction and really determining on a specific level what products will work for you, whether it be the specific terpenes, whether it be cannabinoids, so on and so forth. But I think first and foremost, it's understanding what you need as a consumer, especially because the mindset that we're walking in as consumers into the dispensary is one that comes from a traditional pharmaceutical environment. So it's one pill, a cure-all, and we're off to the races. But the reality with cannabis is that it's a lot longer of a process because of that trial and error. So I think also coming in with the right mindset to the dispensary is also important.
So that makes sense to me, but if it's different for everybody, how do you go about sort of the personalization or the customization? Because it's not like, there's a tremendous amount of product customization. To me, it sounds like it's more about understanding what works for you and then finding what ingredients, if you will, or what profiles of cannabinoids or terpenes are actually in a product. And that seems to be an issue these days because how do you know? Everybody, when you got an industry that's selling on THC and strain, and by the way, strain is like often misused. Like I don't even think strain is the right term.
Yeah, or relabeled. You see a lot of products that something's not selling, and then they just relabel it and just slap a more popular strain on it just so they can move the inventory. So I 100% agree with what you're saying, and there's a product differentiation problem in the industry because of the predominance of THC. And you can look at it like shopping by THC is like going into a wine shop or a beer shop and just trying to purchase something on ABV, and it doesn't get into the what separates, a red wine from a white wine, or a pilsner from an IPA. So what we really need to do is lean into the science, I think, and really dig into the science, which has been, crippled by prohibition. But we need to get into the science and to understand what actually makes these products different. And not only that, from a product differentiation standpoint, but it's very difficult to read a terpene report, right? When you get these terpene reports, they're difficult to comprehend. So if we can have something that kind of translates these terpene reports into something that's easy to understand, I think that would make big headway.
Well, that's even if the lab is pulling the terpenes, right? If you're getting a full spectrum of it, and a lot of times you don't even know, because even if you do have access to a lab report, it's not always the terpenes there. So, Scott, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I think to Joe's point, right, you're only as good as the pool of your data, right? Yeah. And there is a significant issue, and has been in this industry, with the lack of data from falsifying lab reports and THC percentages, and the list goes on and on, right? But I think, again, speaking on the consumer side of things, I think what's most important is to strip out process of elimination, the things that don't matter. Strain name, get it out of your head. We have on our platform over 5,267 cultivars, and 98% of them are hybrids. And that's my next point. Get rid of focusing on type, indica, sativa. There is no scientific correlation whatsoever that supports that if a consumer consumes an indica product, that they are going to have a certain experience, or with a sativa. So I think first and foremost, it's to really evaporate the junk that has been perpetuated in this industry for decades upon decades. And those are two of the biggest ones. And secondly, to Joe's point, focusing on just high THC percentage. This is a number one piece of feedback or inquiry we hear at the dispensary. What's your highest THC product with your for your lowest price point? That is exactly like going into the liquor store and asking for highest proof. You're going to have a horrible experience. It's no different for cannabis. So
Where's
I think
your
right there,
2020? Where's your
right. So I think first and foremost, removing the myths that are in the industry, and then second piece of this is being able to find a resource that is able to maybe not so much dilute, but translate the complexity of cannabis, because it has over 500 compounds in it, into a digestible format. And that's a big goal of ours, because ask a majority of consumers, do you know what terpenes are? No. Do you know what flavonoids are? No. Do you know what cannabinoids are? No. The list goes on and on and on. So what we really have in the industry is not only a misalignment on incentives, which is really what's accelerating selling high THC products because they fetch the highest price point, but we also have, because of that, in part, a misalignment on consumer education, because a more educated consumer is going to walk in and expect more. And if the consumer expects more, naturally that's going to force these dispensaries to drive a higher experience for the consumer, and back to this personalization aspect that we're talking about.
But Scott, it seems like we almost have a chicken and egg problem though, right? So if the consumers don't know about it and the industry is just talking about THC and strain, then how are they ever going to know about it? How are they going to ever know any different? Like that, that's the part that seems to be missing, because when I talk to people about cannabis and I talk about terpenes, they give me that funny look, like, what? What'd you say? What's a terpene? And you talk about, your cannabis could have other things in it other than just THC. You realize that, right? No, they don't. A lot of people don't. So how do we change the dialogue to educate the consumers when the mainstream business is not only talking about THC, but they're lying about it?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. So I think it's a funnel focus. So what I mean by that is, this is something interesting. My co-founder was one of the top SEO specialists for Kayak and Wayfair.com. And one of the things that we found when we started looking at the problem around personalization and also trying to understand the demand, is that more people are searching for strains that help with X or Y or specific terpenes more than couches and beds on a monthly basis, which is staggering because, I mean, we all have couches and beds for the most part, right? So that shows that consumers are looking for information, right? They are searching for that. 84%, and maybe ChatGPT has changed this a little bit, but 84% of search starts on the internet. And in the comfort of your home, this is where consumers are starting their educational journey. So I think really it's about us collectively as an industry grabbing onto that funnel of demand. And that's what we're focused on, that organic traffic of consumers that are looking for information beyond just THC percentage, consumers that are looking for a better experience or what we call intentional consumption, and addressing them at top of funnel, which starts on the internet, which I think is why technology plays such an important role, not only in our life, but especially in the cannabis industry. And as this industry continues to mature, technology is going to become more embedded in this process. And so we have a responsibility as different tech platforms to be able to support the consumer through that journey. But I think it's about addressing it at top of funnel, which happens on the internet.
So if it's happening on the internet, how do we go about sort of matching genomics or goals, that I have, like I just need to sleep. I don't want to use this during the day. I just can't sleep at night, or whatever my specific health goals are, or my specific genomics, because cannabis is personal. How do we do it? How do we match the plant to the person?
Well, I think it's important that we understand one of the most important things is, modes of administration mean a lot when consuming cannabis, right? And exactly like Scott was saying, this is a many to many problem, right? There's many kind of active ingredients and there's many receptors in our body. So we kind of get high all the same way, right? If you smoke, it goes into the lungs, bloodstream, up to the blood-brain barrier, passes the blood-brain barrier, and you're high. When it comes to ingesting cannabis, there's many more factors at play, mainly our own metabolism, right? How do we metabolize?
You're talking about, just for our audience, you're talking about ingesting like gummies or
gummies, tinctures, things like that. Yeah, but whenever you take an edible, there's another layer of complexity that comes into personalization, and that is your own. Not only is it the own endocannabinoid system, but you're involving your own metabolism and how you metabolize and digest these compounds.
So that being the case, because it's different, how do I know? How do I match what I need with what? Because I think what you guys are talking about, you're really talking about multiple characteristics. It's a multi-dimensional product that we have tried to make a single dimensional product.
Yes.
But those multi-dimensions impact how I'm going to feel, how it's going to work. And if I don't understand those multi-dimensions, I can't match it up with these other things. So
yeah, the problem is that, there's only one product quality attribute that is really being measured in cannabis, and that's THC, like we've been talking about.
Right.
So what we need to do is start to, quantify these other metrics that lead to product differentiation and potentially even kind of quality differentiations, especially when it comes to cannabis flower. When it comes to edibles, I think the question is really dose driven, where it's I really do think it's you really have to start small when you're ingesting cannabis, because once that monkey jumps on your back, he's not going away until you go to sleep. So it's very much we want to, from an industry perspective, I think we really want to mitigate negative experiences, because like you were saying earlier, Scott, cannabis has definitely gotten stronger. And one of the things that we really want to avoid is, if a person has that initial bad experience, they may just say, hey, this isn't for me, and kind of turn off to the whole entire just turn off cannabis. And I think it's more of what we need to do is kind of match the intentions with products. But how do we do that when the status quo in the industry right now is to just kind of give blanket effects to everything, right? Just label products with blanket effects, and that's actually extremely counterproductive when it comes to the personalization issue that we're talking about.
You know what I feel like when I go into a dispensary? I feel like I did when I first started working out and I went to the gym. And I was like intimidated because you got all these gym rats in there that knew exactly how these machines worked. And like I was dropping stuff on my foot and I had no idea. like I wasn't the big bulky guy, and so I ended up having to go to, literally like a private trainer where it was just me and the private trainer, because I didn't know how to set the machines. I didn't know what the machines did. I didn't know how to solve different things. And if it wasn't for that personal interaction with the trainer, and I didn't have to do it in front of an audience of people, where I'm dropping stuff on myself and using all the wrong machines. It's like I feel that way when I go into a dispensary, because I feel like the bud tender is sort of linked to that OG THC customer, cannabis user, and he's talking one language and I'm like, but wait a minute, I'm not here to get high. I got a sleep problem. I got this, and then you talk to them and it's like, it seems like they're talking past you. So like I'm that marginalized consumer that I think represents a good portion of the up and coming consumer world. And we're just, we're intimidated. We're frustrated. How do we fix
could not agree more. This is exactly, you just described my wife too as well. Super intimidated about walking to a dispensary. What do I ask? Where do I look? What products, like a category, should I focus on? What are these things called? Terpenes. Again, this is where I think it's meeting the consumer in an environment where they're most comfortable, sitting on their couch, sitting at their desk, doing their due diligence, right? So that when they do walk into the dispensary, they know what questions to ask. Let's be honest. You have many dispensaries, it's what, a 10, 15-minute interaction. There is no way, maybe a sliver of a chance that the bud tender is going to adequately be able to service that consumer. So I think a lot of this is based on the research from your own home. I know on our platform, two things that we focus on. One of the big ones is education. We have over 9 guides and 71 chapters within those guides that have been boiled down to what we think is an approachable format through our science advisory board. And we've gamified the education experience to promote consumers to continue to educate themselves. So they get different things like education badges on our platform. I think that's really important. Additionally, the data that we have aggregated isn't, again, we have a data problem in this industry, but it's a lot better than what the average consumer is doing, which is licking their finger and sticking it up in the air and hoping for the best. So we do, in some cases, specifically play a law of averages with these things. But my hopes, and I know our specific mission through empowering the consumer, is to change the standard. There is no national training system for bud tenders. None. It is up to the singular dispensary to educate that bud tender. So you're going to get varying degree of experience and knowledge for every dispensary that you look at. So I think the consumer being able to pressure the dispensary on these specific questions and these specific points is going to be important, which will also increase some of the standardization that we have in this industry. There is no standard COA and testing, right? Not all, to your point, Brian, what you had mentioned earlier, not all states require certain testing, right? Okay, mold, mildew, but not all terpene, so on and so forth. So I think, and I spoke to, we're connected through Metric, and one of the things that they're pushing for is standardization around testing. So I think there's a lot of things that need to change, but unfortunately, as companies within the space, we're at the mercy of the data that we have. And so you really have to be able to navigate the complexities of that data, spit it out in a digestible format for the consumer so they can make progress. It may not be where we want, but listen, SpaceX wasn't landing rockets when they first launched a rocket into the air, right? That took years and years and millions of dollars. So for us, we really push consumers to understand what they need. because one of the challenges with consumers is or humans, we don't necessarily know what we want. So number one, what we put through is a preference, a quiz where we ask consumers, what specifically are you looking for? What conditions are you trying to address? What effects are you looking for? What terpenes do you prefer? And then we actually track the behavior, because the behavior is a much more holistic, three-dimensional piece of data that goes beyond what someone's saying, right? Which is where the Netflix and the Spotify's exist, where now all of a sudden you have a curation of what you didn't even know you wanted. And so I think that tracking is also important.
So that's interesting, and I want to address, I think, an important point. First of all, I had the opportunity. Joe was actually visiting the Philly area, and we went and did a little tour of different dispensaries. So, and I sort of let him lead, and I would just listen in on what he was asking the owners or the managers, and I can tell you that all of the owners and the managers, I think they agree with this. They agree with what we're saying, but yet when you talk to their bud tenders, you're getting that wrong dialogue like you're talking about. So I totally agree that there's that standardization and that training needs to be done. But the second aspect is, look, I've been building technology for 30 years. Okay. This is my fourth software company. And I can tell you that when it comes to these types of things, if it's all about the data. So if it's garbage in, it's going to be garbage out. So how are you guys solving for the science and the data problem? And Joe, I know you've been, I mean, I love Dr. Abrams. I just a fascinating man to me. I love talking to him. I love listening to him. I love asking him questions. And it's like he's got this massive computer in his head of cannabis data, and he also has it in his computer. But talk to me about that, because if it's garbage in, it's garbage out. And I've seen a lot of tools that, quite frankly, I don't think they're using good data, good like empirical data. So Joe, let's start with you.
Yeah, we John and I coined the term that what he's developed is kind of forged in the fire of variance that we talk about, right? Where he's been looking at COA data and lab tests from mainly kind of from up in the Emerald Triangle, but for going on a decade plus now. And Scott, I can't agree more with what you're saying about a lack of standards when it comes to lab testing, because we are only as good as the data we get. There's that is completely undeniable, and it's on the labs really and the labs get a lot of they get a lot of heat, and some of them definitely deserve it, but some of them are really trying to push the industry forward, right? And Brian, we talked about this, where it's the concept of one of the hardest things is to buck the status quo, right? And the status quo right now is THC percentage and cost, right? We can't do anything about cost, but I think we can do something about THC percentage and giving consumers additional metrics to aid in this product differentiation, so that they can understand what each cultivar is going to how it's going to affect them. But from a data validation standpoint, one of the things that we would like to do is work with labs, and John has kind of created this kind of a lab certification, if you will, which will be kind of one of the things that we want to do in a next step, which is start to work with these labs and run control charting. And basically what we're doing is kind of co-signing a lab and saying that, like, hey, okay, your data is valid, your data is validated, and they would potentially get some sort of stamp. But what it would allow them to do is kind of the products that come through these labs would be able to kind of put this mark on it and say, hey, we can. There's a level of assurance that the data is valid that's attached to this product.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense, and I think if we start to change the narrative away from just pure THC, I guess maybe people can stop lying about it, because that's a big problem.
That's exactly, like, it's if you think about it, right? If you give this industry, what we've given them is we've given them a single metric to judge product qualities off of, right? And THC content has nothing to do with the quality of a product, right? It's really just indication of how much THC is in the product. Some of my favorite flower that I've ever smoked in my life is, probably low mid teens, but just, super oily, dripping with flavor. And I really think that one of the things that I would love to see is kind of lower THC flower, where what the THC numbers not only kind of corrupted the lab industry, but it's kind of corrupted the entire industry. That's, from people that are selecting plants to from breeders and plant selectors all the way through the supply chain, where it's this concept of higher THC, higher THC. But I think there's a huge disconnect between look, the demand for high THC products and what the industry is putting out there. Where, I think that there's actually a demand for, lower to middle kind of THC products, but the retails won't stock them because they don't think they'll sell. So there's this big disconnect. And I would just want to chime in one thing that you were saying, Scott, concerning kind of how we can bridge this gap. And I think as regulatory advances, I think the more kind of consumption lounges that we can get, where people can kind of consume a product and have an interaction with a bud tender or someone there, I think that's really going to elevate the ability to kind of educate consumers. Where COVID made things weird. It kind of turned everything digital, and I don't disagree with you, Scott, where everything kind of does start online now. But I think kind of adding the human element to cannabis, and brands that are doing these engagements and kind of reaching out and kind of adding the human element to this, I think are brands that are going to win.
So we're talking about standardization of labs, but what do you guys think about the standardization of labeling across America?
That's a massive undertaking, but I think one that will inevitably be the case. Listen, I think generally, with whether it be lab testing, whether it be standardization with labels, I think dispensaries over the next 5 years are in for a rude awakening if they are not leaning into personalization. One of the big issues, aside from what we're talking about with data sets and poor data quality in, poor results out, is that, to Joe, your point, there's a massive disconnect where 95% of dispensaries don't know their consumers.
Yeah.
So what do they continue to do? They continue to sell high THC products for a highest price point. We talked to probably 8 out of 10 dispensaries and ask, what's your number one problem? Space. Okay, what do we mean about space? More space for inventory? No, being able to dedicate more space to SKUs that actually move, products that people actually want. So there's a clear disconnect from what consumers actually need, and that data being fed back to the dispensaries, and the dispensaries being able to cater to that demand. And that's what, Joe, to your point, and also what I had mentioned earlier, that incentives are misaligned. There are about 100 different problems going on, but I do think it starts with the consumer. I truly do, because no matter how much you try to change on the dispensary end, if the demand and inquiries are not happening at the consumer end, there's going to be not many things that are going to change the dispensary, because right now their differentiator is a race to the bottom off price.
Yeah.
Or their feng shui of their dispensary is different. Okay, that's great. That's short-term results. I think really personalization is going to increase AOV and LTV for the dispensaries because the consumer is having a better experience. But the only way that consumer is going to have a better experience is if the dispensary is getting tied back or fed data about the consumer. And right now that piece is very fragmented because it's only happening at the bud tender level right now. And do we think the bud tender's turning around and they're collecting that data and then sitting down in a meeting or throwing it into something and analyzing it? Absolutely not. And so that needs to start. There needs to be a catch can for that information back to the dispensary. And we need to really start understanding the consumer before we start, making all of these rash decisions in 17 different directions, assuming that we know what is best for the consumer.
I had 3 marketers on the show the other day, and we'll be airing that shortly. But there were some interesting dynamics in talking to these cannabis marketers, and it just seemed to me that they lack data. They just don't have the information they need to be able to even help these brands in a way that is truly meaningful to connect to the majority of folks. So that was one thing that I sort of took away with that. And the second thing was, one of them mentioned a very, I think Lori Parfit was saying, who is a very well-respected marketer. She said that 40% of consumers are starting that shopping at home, and they're ordering at home, and then they're just going to pick up, right? And from there. So Scott, to your point, like, they're like, browsing these menus, but even browsing menus from home, they're not getting what they need. They're not getting the information and the education. So if they're sitting there, browsing the menus, like, it seems to me like you're right. That's the place to start, through education, but also asking the right questions so that we can start getting the analytics behind that of what they're looking for. And then to your point, Scott, is about journaling and sort of talking about the effects, so you can build that into your algorithm, and then we can match the consumer need with the science and the characteristics of the plant. And I think that's what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
Yep. And this is exactly, I mean, I don't want to continue to, take this chance to just like advertise Hashdash, but this is literally the biggest problem that I think we face in this industry right now. If we do not change our behavior on the business front and change incentives, this industry is going to continue to just spin in circles. It's like having a powerful engine and it's not connecting to the transmission, and the wheels aren't taking traction. So one of the things that we're really focusing on doing is understanding what consumers need by putting them through a quiz and tracking their preferences, further tracking their behavior, educating and gamifying the experience for the consumer, so they push that expectation at the dispensary front. And then what we're doing is we're connecting to POS systems and dispensaries, so we can tell Becky which menu has highest percentage of products that actually meet her preferences based off data. And we're collecting that data not only from the database that we've collected, which is over 5,000 strains and over 500,000 data points, but then through metric COAs and POS systems too as well. And we have a constant feedback loop that then we can take that information and provide the analytics to the dispensary. So that way the dispensary is actually stocking products that consumers want. And those dispensaries can see that data at scale within their area. So maybe it's not specifically from their consumers, but around their region of products that are actually turning and consumers want. Again, it's a massive undertaking, but I think that it starts with someone tackling this, and nobody has. The Leaflies and the Weed Maps of the world completely went revenue first, consumer way down at the bottom of the pit. And so for us, it's really about David going after Goliath. The consumer needs to be put first, and they have not. We have been doing a disservice to every single consumer in this industry. And again, sure, data may not be perfect, but the way that I look at it is progress is incremental. It is not monumental. And so there needs to be certain steps that we take to get there. And we're trying to build step number 1, if you will.
So it seems to me, though, that when, like, let's say you have a consumer that comes in and they're buying a certain strain, they're buying a certain product, right? They may not know why they're buying that product. Like, I know that if I have a certain product that's working for me, I might be able to get that product. I might be able to get that same effect in another product in another place, but I wouldn't know it because I don't know what it is that's in that product that's giving me that effect. So
Yeah,
this lack of knowledge.
Yeah, you don't know what's working for you. Yeah.
Exactly. I just know it works. I don't know why it works. I just think it's maybe this strain or this brand, but it has nothing to do with, really may not have anything to do with the THC, may have nothing to do with that particular strain, but it has to do with all the other characteristics that are in that product. So how would I go from one place to another? So let's say I'm visiting you out in California, Joe, and I go into a dispensary and they don't have my brand.
Yeah.
And so how do I know what I should buy that gives me that same? I mean, I'd be lost again without having my hometown brand.
Yeah, no, and it's one of the other concepts I think that's important when it comes to personalization is, especially when you're dealing with something, this is more the case when it comes to flowers and things that are inhaled, is that there's inherent batch variability across flower runs. It's just, it's a plant. It's just going to happen, and there's also inherent variability within the plant, right? Where the things, the large colas on the top of the plant are going to be, they're going to have basically the most of everything. So to your point, that's what we're really trying to do is with Triad Data Labs, is solve that issue that you're talking about, where we are going to put a platform together that's going to offer, batch specific labeling for products that also present a revolutionary data visualization for cannabis. With that, and this is all comes from what Dr. Abrams has been doing over the last decade. And as you said, like, John's the best because he's like 8 different scientists in one. So that we have Dr. Abrams is a huge blessing to us. But to get to your point, I think one of the other big challenges is the patchwork of regulation that varies state to state. So nobody knows what's going on with this administration and what's going to happen concerning federal, rescheduling. Ideally, it's descheduling, because I'm not sure how much of an impact rescheduling is going to have, except you might get, certain interstate commerce. But we really want this plant to be descheduled and get some sort of guidance from a federal level that will allow this standardization that we've been talking about, right? Because states aren't going to get together and standardize themselves because they're too busy trying to protect the tax revenue that they're getting from their own individual states. So this is a massive problem that would really help if we got a slight amount of federal guidance.
So if that happened, if descheduling happened, it would make your lives easier, right? I would imagine, particularly if it leads to standardization of labels and testing and, that kind of thing. Is that what you're saying?
Ideally, but it will also, bring, this industry is getting hammered from so many angles, especially, over regulation and taxation, especially out here in California. Like when we were in Jersey and we went to the store and I looked at the tax receipt and I was like, wow, 8.5% tax. Like, in San Diego now, I want to say it's 30, like a hair under 30 out the door. And they just raised the state excise tax, and California, San Diego locally also just added 2% to their local excise tax. So it's going to be closer to like 35, 36 out the door. And it's just not manageable from a business perspective. So
I hope Governor Murphy of New Jersey is not listening to this, because
keep doing what you're doing, Governor Murphy. You're doing a great job. Yeah, keep the tax rate reasonable, because
but you just said something in New Jersey was not overtaxed.
Yeah, no, exactly. Oh, yeah. Compared to California, no, not overtaxed at all.
Wow. What do you think, Scott?
Well, I think from a consumer practicality standpoint, Brian, back to your point, it's tracking, right? You might not draw the lines on what works for you, terpenes, etc. But after enough tracking and experimentation, you can easily make correlation. I shouldn't use the word easily, but you can make a correlation as to what may or may not work for you. So I think every consumer should be journaling, whether it be physical, digital, what have you. Take a picture of the label, request COAs, grab as much information as you can. And eventually, after enough iterations, you will start to make the correlation between products that work. So maybe it's not a specific strain, again, throw that out the window, or a specific product, but terpene, cannabinoid profile, et cetera. You can start to draw the strings on, okay, this combination actually works well for me, whether it's that I'm, dealing with anxiety, or whether I'm going for a certain effect, so on and so forth.
Have you ever tried to ask a dispensary for a COA?
Yeah, it's like pulling teeth. And I would say 8 times out of 10, they don't even know what a COA is, which is an issue.
That's my point. I mean, Joe, I think we asked for some when we were traversing around some of those.
Yeah, I mean,
dispensaries.
I've called and asked, and once again, I've gotten a lot of what's a COA, because I feel like it's you know, I know you have it. They're in metric, right? They're attached to metric. I know you have it, but I think it's just the awareness of some of your employees, like exactly you were talking about, Scott. Like, you know, making sure that you train your employees appropriately so that they one of my biggest pet peeves with bud tenders is they just make recommendations on things that they like and don't listen to consumers. So I think it's the concept of, yeah, listen, like, and from a consumer standpoint, like you were saying, Scott, also, like, you know, trust yourself, like, start to learn what aromas you like, right? What kind of flavor profiles that you're into for whatever, you know, desired effect you're looking to achieve. I think that's really important. But, you know, in a lot of these places, you know, things are prepackaged, so it's kind of that, you know, that it's the regulatory fight is serious.
Mhm.
You know what? I remember when you know, I watched the car buying experience change because of the internet, and you know, you would start seeing CarMax and AutoNation and these companies come up, and I think it was CarMax. And I remember going into this. I'm used to the old, you know, drag out and haggle with the salesperson, and I can remember going into a CarMax for the first time, and the person walks me over to a kiosk, and I was taken aback because they said, "Hey, before we you know, talk about anything else, you know, I'd like to just ask you some questions." And it was it's almost like I see what you guys are working on should be changing that retail experience. Like, so when you walk into a dispensary, you get a guy like me who's intimidated by it, or your wife, Scott, that, you know, you almost walk up to a kiosk and you say, "Let me ask you a couple questions. What are you looking for? Like, why are you here?"
Mhm.
Right. And then you just start drilling into those questions, you know, to be able to then drill into what might work. But if you don't have the characteristics of the product and the science in the machine, you're never going to be able to answer those questions. So, and because I don't think I mean, we're certainly not getting it from the bud tender today. So I think what you guys are doing is so critically important to the future of the mainstream and the legitimization and the survival of this industry. And I mean, kudos to the work that both you guys and your teams are doing here, because I can tell you from my experience, I talk to other people like me. They won't walk into a dispensary. They'll call me and say, "Hey, what should I do?" I'm like, "I don't know. I don't, you know, what do you like what like
What
I'm
do you
the
buy? Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I'm not the expert. I know what works for me, but you know, I can't tell you what's going to work for you." And I think that's really the key thing. So, you know, in talking about that, where, you know, let's sort of push the fast forward button. You know, what do you think has to happen for, and Joe's heard me say this before in technology, is I never believe that technology is a revolution. Very rarely do you see a revolutionary technology that changes everything like the next day. I mean, we can give some examples of some of those things. I believe it's evolutionary. I mean, even the smartphone was evolutionary, right? Started with a thing that looked like you were walking in in World War II, a giant box that, exactly, I mean, that was my first phone. It looked like I was a field sergeant. And, to the point that now, we're holding this thing that's a mini computer and it does lots of stuff. So technology is evolutionary, and an understanding that we're seeing sort of the beginning of this evolutionary. Let's hit that fast forward button. What's next? What has to happen next, and how do you see this playing out over the next 5 years?
I think to Joe's point, number one, it's standardization across the board with product labels and COAs. It's consumer education, probably 5xing, if not 10xing where we are today. And I think it's the dispensary stepping away from a transactional environment. Like, this is not a bank. This is a consultative approach, and it needs to be one that is similar in a way to the way we would approach therapy, right? You're giving another human being very intimate data on your health or your preferences or your needs. So I think that it needs to be set up in a way where that is approachable, where consumers can, a curious alike, or consumers, Brian, such as yourself, feel confident to walk in the dispensary. And I think that happens through more of a consultative approach. What feels more cold than walking into a bank and walking out, spending $110 and feeling like you didn't get what you need? Right. So I think the consultative approach, like some dispensaries are doing on the medical side, needs to come to the adult rec side too as well. The standardization is obviously going to help data sets, better data, better decisions for the consumer, and being able to provide consumers with that outlet to confidently and not feel like they're being judged on the information that they're giving away. That could be through a kiosk that's happening. Quite frankly, human beings are much more likely to provide their data to a piece of technology than they are going to be to another human being. So I think as much as it's important to, Brian and Joe, your point around the human experience being a part of it, I don't think it's the front runner in this next wave where we're going, especially as technology continues to be a bigger part of our everyday lives. We are just used to it. So I see that research happening still at home. I see that then bridging to the dispensary through an actual digital kiosk and being backed up by that consultative approach based off the data that you provided either on a platform, in the kiosk within the dispensary, and then from there being able to walk the consumer towards products that may work for them. And I think the technology piece is 3/4 of the process that allows the dispensary to still bring in volume while still catering on a specific person, consumer to consumer level.
Well, we're seeing that sort of on the pharma side, aren't we? Like with these telehealth,
Yeah.
kind of
Personalized
models.
medicine. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
where we're seeing sort of, literally we're watching these companies where, whether it's for hair loss, sorry, Joe, I don't know if you use one of those, but
I've
we're-
been bracing for male pattern baldness since I was about 14 years old. So I was well prepared for my future.
I think it's those Italian genes. I got the same issue. So when you literally you go to those platforms and they ask you a series of personalized questions, and then they're sort of packaging something personalized for you as far as the product. So is that what you're talking about, Scott? Sort of going in that direction, sort of that model.
Yes, but I think it needs to be integrated within the dispensary POS systems and into the standardized data, because the issue right now is that a lot of the quote unquote personalization that's happening in this industry is very fragmented. It's a bot on a website where you're capturing a moment in time, right? You're saying, oh, what effects or what flavors? There are 4 different questions, most of them, right? So you're getting a snapshot in time. I think it needs to be a big part of social listening, and also a holistic experience with this too. So the tracking and the data set that's coming into the dispensary needs to be beyond the moment in time in the kiosk, because you're just capturing what that person needs right now or may think they need right now. So I think it starts before that, right? That data needs to be collected before. Kiosk reinforces it, human dives deeper, right? So there's really 3 pieces that I see happening.
That makes a lot of sense. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah. To Scott's point, I think, the more educated a consumer can become, the more empowered they are, and the more they're going to know what they want. So to get back to what you were saying, like, a lot of people walk into a dispensary and don't even know what they want. So from a consumer standpoint, that's what I would like to see is more education, lean into the research, right? Lean into the science, which has been kind of, muffled for so long due to federal prohibition. So as we get more of these studies, we're going to get more and more information so that we can properly differentiate products so that consumers have a clear choice of, okay, this is different from this because of this component, or this potential chemical compound. But from an industry standpoint, we have seen we have the data of the narrowing of the gene pool. And the narrowing of the gene pool has kind of created the problem that we're talking about, that, a lot of the products on shelves are the same. So from an industry standpoint, I would love, and we kind of have to go back in time to do this, is that, we kind of got rid of some, unique cultivars because they couldn't hit that, 28, 29, 30% THC. So and I know that there's people out there that still, that are preservationists and still have these things. So I would love to see, from an industry standpoint, that we kind of go back in time a little bit and start to, look for and hunt for these kind of unique cultivars and gene sets that we can then, breed into and kind of increase the gene pool right now. Because right now it's pretty narrow, and it's been disappointing, where, I'm, like I said, I went to Amsterdam twice before, before the year 2005, and that was kind of like the heyday of genetic variants. And I would love to see the industry move back in that direction, which will give consumers a wider breadth of products to choose from.
Well, this has been a really fascinating discussion, and I can talk about it all day, but we're coming up on time. So, Joe, how can somebody get in touch with you and the work that you and Dr. Abrams are doing over at Triad?
The website is triaddatalabs.com. You can email me. I'm joe@triaddatalabs.com. The platform is kind of is nascent right now. It's currently being developed, but yeah, we are extremely excited to roll this platform out when we get there, and I think it could be transformational to the industry.
And that's Triad with a Y, T-R-Y.
Triad with a Y, yes, TRYAD, yes, thank you.
All right. And Scott, how about you? How can folks get in touch with you and your team over at Hashdash?
www.hashdash.com, and you can email me directly, scott@hashdash.com. Love connecting with different individuals in the industry and understanding, what do people need? We're doing this for the consumer at the end of the day. So I love interacting. Feel free to reach out. I promise I don't bite, even though I'm from New England.
And he's not an Eagles fan, by the way. But that's
not an Eagles fan.
I am.
Joe and I are. All right. Well, this has been a fascinating discussion. I urge you, to our listeners out there, if they want to learn more, to reach out to Triad or reach out to Hashdash. Two great leaders here and innovators in this space, doing amazing things. And that's really what this broadcast is about, is connecting with the science, connecting with the technology, and really advancing the industry in a very meaningful way. So thank you both for joining us here on Credible Live. And I'm sure we'll be getting updates from you real soon about the movement of your technology in the market. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us, Brian. You're a legend. I appreciate you.
Yeah. Thanks. Amazing host, Brian. Appreciate you.
Thanks so much.